We have more movers for you. Diane King Hall, host of Morning Movers, is with me, looking at Applovin and not getting included into the S&P 500 so fast. It is down today. Some of your thoughts?
Applovin not feeling the love today on Wall Street today, and this off of it being omitted in inclusion in the S&P 500. As you know, if you get included in the S&P 500, that certainly increases visibility. It increases exposure, especially when you think about index funds. And Nicole, you've talked about these funds that have to then match what is within that basket. It also, limits liquidity as well. So you're seeing some pressure on Applovin today, down more than 5% at the moment, down about 6% really right now. And it's had a strong run this year, but again, that disappoints investors who had been anticipating this, because there was a lot of talk about, different companies that could be potentially added to the S&P 500, and Applovin had been on a lot of lists. In fact, it was leading a lot of lists in terms of the expectation of it being added to that. So there's just questions around it, at least for the day. You still have analysts bullish on Applovin, though. Morgan Stanley out today raising their price target on Applovin to $460 a share from $420. They are maintaining an overweight rating, which is essentially the equivalent of a buy. The catalysts they see are that plan to sell their first-party games business. They see that as enhancing shareholder value. And then they just see strategic benefits overall, the shifts from the profits from the lower multiple gaming to the higher multiple ad tech. There's been obviously a lot of focus on that ad tech, especially as it looks to be a market share taker from, say, Google's ad business. And that's been one of the things that's been a tailwind for Applovin. And you recall, in terms of the selling of that business, they had made that plan to sell their Triple Dot Studios. That was for $400 million in cash plus 20% stake in the combined entity. So again, overall, Morgan Stanley seeing that as a catalyst is not being reflected in the share price today, because overall investor disappointment, as you mentioned, Nicole, about not being included in the S&P 500.
Yeah, but it's still a winner year to date.
Absolutely.
But that's the whole thing. People like to be included into the S&P 500, have those money managers follow. There is value when you start to break up a company and spin off the parts. As you noted, they had an overweight rating, and that first-party games business could be somewhat lucrative. We're seeing a little bit of that splitting happening with Warner Brothers today, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's no surprise to see this. You and I have been covering this for a while, what's been happening in the media space, and the shifts, the consolidations, the split up. So Warner Brothers Discovery, the latest to do this, and this was kind of expected in the sense of they were trying to figure out how they go next. So now they're splitting up into two separate companies. They made this announcement this morning. They're essentially accelerating what's been an internal reorganization amid the shifting media landscape. The media landscape has changed over the years. So there will be two new companies. One will focus on streaming and studios. That'll include HBO, HBO Max, DC Studios. Again, the streaming and studios part of the business. It's got massive TV and film libraries there. The other side of that will be the other business. The other company will be the global networks that will house the CNN, the TNT Sports, the Discovery channels, some networks in Europe, and then digital brands like Bleacher and Discovery Plus. So the timeline when it comes to this transaction, the split is expected to close by mid-2026. Obviously, these things take time. It's intended to be tax-free, and both companies will have these kind of arm's length. They talked about this arm's length transition agreements in order to be able to maintain operational efficiencies. And they've been doing some things internally that leads to where they are today. And the goal is to create strategic flexibility because of the disruption that's been occurring within the media landscape, and to sharpen focus. So again, one side is streaming and studios, the other side is going to be the networks. And it's very similar to moves that we've seen, like that Comcast spin out, Nicole.
Yeah, and look, the competitive landscape is so tough, right? I mean, when you talk about streaming and what works and having content, when you think about the battle, Netflix has done so incredibly well. Big picture thought, maybe?
Yeah, no, to your point about Netflix, they got another upgrade today, so the street likes it, and it's been the leader in terms of streaming. Now, the street likes this move when it comes to Warner Brothers Discovery because shares are up more than 9% today, which takes it positive for the year. Still slightly lagging the S&P 500 because we know, the S&P 500, it's in a little bit of jeopardy today, but it's still hovering around that 6,000 level. The S&P 500 now better by, as of Friday's close, about 2% for the year. Warner Brothers with this move today, now trailing that, gaining a little more than 1.5%. But again, obviously Wall Street likes this move. Break up the parts and see how you operate better separate.
Okay, last but not least, McDonald's. Huge lines outside McDonald's yesterday. We had the Puerto Rican Day Parade here in New York City. Something that people love. It's a spot. It's a hot spot, I think, in certain ways, too. People love McDonald's in the big picture.
They do, and it has been outperforming the S&P 500 year to date, but it's under pressure today, and this is off the back of a downgrade. The downgrade at McDonald's is from Morgan Stanley. They've downgraded it to equal weight from overweight, so they're moving to the sidelines. It's obviously not a sell rating, although some argue that when you see a rating like this from the sell side, it's essentially the equivalent of a sell rating. They've lowered their price target to $324 a share from $329, which actually does signal some upside from here. It's about, we'll call it around 5% upside from here. The concerns that the analyst has about McDonald's is that it just won't be insulated from just some pressures that are facing fast food in general, economic policy uncertainty. They see that impacting lower income consumers, and then just shifts in health and wellness trends. And I remember talking to Misha recently, who I know you talk to regularly, about she calls it the GLP-1 effect, and she's constructive on what she calls the vanity stocks. So McDonald's obviously wouldn't be one of those, but you can't ignore that it has been outperforming the S&P 500 year to date. It is higher, but under some pressure today, Nicole.
And I'm reading about the chicken. I don't know. People used to like the chicken nuggets, and now they're trying to make them healthier. And they have less breading and appear smaller. And the franchises have begun to express concerns about the appearance since early last fall. This article says, are the chicken strips to blame?
Too skinny. I know, they're too skinny.
That's what it says.
I mean, there's another analyst who's talked about that, the expectation that there was supposed to be a catalyst there, and that's just not really materializing the way that was expected.
All right, and comp sales fell in the first quarter.
Yeah, it did.
3.6%, so traffic a little slower. And also, we'll get a consumer sentiment print on Friday. But, while wages were good in the last jobs print, people need jobs, they need money to spend, and, all of the retailers and fast food, how much will people spend? And that's the final thought I have there.
No, you make a great point. You've made this point before, Nicole. Even though fast food is cheaper in the kind of the grand scheme of things, it's not cheaper than groceries.
Yeah. Okay. Diane King Hall, great to see you.
Good to be
You
with
can catch Diane on Morning Movers each morning.